Hey everyone, welcome to another Modern Deck Tech. Alright, today we are revisiting Temur Dread Delver. So this is a June 21 update, obviously with some MH2 Modern Horizons 2 adjustments and thoughts. Normally today I would have a Commander Deck Tech posted up. Next week would be a MTG OB roll, giving me a couple of weeks break, but nope, I'm going to be doing a few more deck techs, stretching it out since Modern Horizons 2 is kind of unprecedented. It's a special set coming out with a lot of new tools for us and against us if you're a Temur Delver player. So yeah, this is going to be one of a few decks I'll be deck teching the next few weeks, integrating new Modern Horizons cards. So let's get to it, but before we get to the core, as usual, just a quick note, Patreon link is in the description of this video. Check it out if you want to support this channel, but really Patreon is there more to make you money and not me. You'll get what I mean when you take a look at the rewards. There's also a video on the Patreon page that kind of explains it all in 5 minutes. Be pretty interesting for you to check it out. Alright, the core. So the core doesn't change much here in terms of creatures. I'm not putting Dragon's Rage Channeler in this deck. I think it's a bit too contentious with Dreadhorde Arcanist in terms of Dreadhorde kind of always picking cards out of the graveyard, and Delirium being important for a DRC build. Plus I want to play some other Delirium cards with DRC, and I found it just to be a bit slightly too contentious with Dreadhorde Arcanist. It would work, but I find it would be too all in on the graveyard, and this just made a lot more sense to me. It gives me enough space to play other cards. If you want to see a DRC list, that's coming up very soon. There'll be a couple of them. So Delver's Secret stays the same here, Dreadhorde Arcanist stays the same, Tarmogoyf stays the same. So not much changing there. What is changing here is in the cantrip. So Expressive Iteration came out in Strixhaven, so this is not new to Modern Horizons 2. But I have been testing it out a lot more recently, and I have to say that I've been pretty impressed with the card. It's essentially I wouldn't say it's a brainstorm, but you are going through 3 cards. 2 of them, depending on what 3 cards you draw and on what turn you cast Expressive Iteration, 2 of them are going to be played that turn. And only one of them is going to be rejected to the bottom of the library. And then hear me out. So let's say it's your turn 3. You haven't done your land drop yet. You play Expressive Iteration, you draw 3 cards. Alright, one of them is a land. So that land is auto going into exile, right? And you're going to be playing it this turn. So that means you have 2 cards now to choose from that are either going to go into your hand, one's going to go into your hand, the other one's going to go into the bottom of your library. So you choose obviously the best of the 2. Hopefully they're not lands. And if they're lands, I guess your one of them is a land, I guess your choice is easy. And the other one goes to the bottom, the other goes to your hand. You play that land drop for that turn, boom, you just drew 2 cards for 2 mana, and that's a pretty insane rate. So Expressive Iteration, when it's played out that way, is pretty darn good. It also works in other scenarios. So I don't know, if you have enough mana open, you can put 1 card into your hand, another card into exile, like a lightning bolt or even a creature, whatever it may be, and you can play it that turn, and boom, you still drew 2 cards. So there's a lot of power behind this card. I'm really liking it. It allows you to filter through the 3 top cards of your library. Yeah, I've just been very impressed. I played it between 2 and 3. I found 4 to be a bit too much and taking up a bit too much space, but I think 3 is a good number to have, depending on what other spells you have in the library. Serum Visions, it's still there. Hasn't been supplanted just yet. Preordained is still banned, so that's going to be there for a while. Abundant Harvest is the new card from Modern Horizons 2. Really enjoying Abundant Harvest. So far in the decks I've been playing it in, I've been playing it as a 4 of. This might be a number I might adjust in the future, depending on the type of deck I'm playing. But yeah, Abundant Harvest has been pretty impressive. Very rarely has it been a dud for me. Yeah, sometimes when you choose non-land, you're going to get potentially a card you didn't necessarily need. But in this deck, most of the cards are cards you necessarily need. Worst case, even if Abundant Harvest, gets you into another Serum Visions, well, Serum Visions is the card you could then use to filter out more cards. Abundant Harvest will also allow you to get through land clumps, which often happen, even in a deck with 17 lands. So if you don't want, to get stuck in land clumps, 2, 3, 4 turns of drawing lands, which is just usually a death sentence, Abundant Harvest is a good way to do it. But Abundant Harvest is also a good way to keep really greedy one land hands. So, you have a fetch or a breeding pool, whatever. You have a green producing mana. You keep Abundant Harvest in your hand as well, and that's it. Everything else is just gas. Fine. You play your breeding pool or whatever, You cast Abundant Harvest searching for another land. You guarantee your second land drop. You can potentially draw a third land on your second turn, and you're pretty much set for the game. So Abundant Harvest really allows you to mulligan less often and really choose what you need at any given time in a game. If you need another extra land, you can use Abundant Harvest to get your extra land. So yeah, it's really been a useful card, and yeah, I'm going to keep playing it for a while to come. The removal. So a few things have been tested out here, let's say. I mean, Lightning Bolt is always there. Fire Ice is now a new addition to Modern, and that's pretty darn interesting. I'm warm on Fire and Ice, ironically. I didn't work on that joke, I promise. But I am kind of warm. I'm not cold or hot on Fire and Ice. I'm down the middle. I really like the card. I like its utility. It's a shame you can't cast both sides at the same time later in the game when you do have 4 mana available to you. That would have been nice. It would have been kind of crazy, at least for a deck like us. But you can choose one or the other. Tapping a target permanent can be useful if you want to get in your last attack step to finish off your opponent. Or early on, you can, tap a land on their upkeep, cut them off from 1 extra land, screw up that turn for them, draw a card at the same time. That's a very nice tempo play, and you can continue on from there. Very annoying for your opponent. A bonus for you. So I've been testing out different numbers of Fire and Ice. I think 4 is a bit too much. 2 of is a nice number. It's still a 2 mana spell. Keep that in mind. So you're gonna have to keep that in mind in terms of your mana curve. But I'm not sure if I'm gonna be playing Fire and Ice in all of my Temur decks. I think this will be a card that I'll consider when I really have nothing left, or if I feel like I need more abilities to tap permanents, I suppose, in drawing cards. Then Fire and Ice might come in handy. If we start seeing a lot more little aggro decks that have a lot of creatures with 1 toughness, Fire might be useful there to be able to take out 2 creatures with 1 shot. I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm warm on the card. I did play it in this list. It plays well. Obviously, it doesn't work very well with Dreadhorde Arcanist, but as a utility spell, I really like it. It gives you some options at any point in the game. Suspend is another card I've been really testing out. Again, when Suspend was first spoiled, I was like, oh wow, that's really interesting. Then, as usual, just like Subtlety, you keep reading the card and you're like, okay, what are the type of scenarios that it's gonna be played in? Okay, what does that mean? I mean, at the best case scenario, you're saving yourself, 3 combat phases. Okay, fine. It is what it is. I hesitate to say the Suspend is better than Vapor Snag, but it really depends on what you want to do. And I've had this discussion with a few people already. So Vapor Snag, you kick a creature off the battlefield, and your opponent takes one damage. Okay, fine. Your opponent's gonna have to recast that creature to get it back on the battlefield. For large creatures, that's gonna be a problem. Here you might be, time walking them. For smaller creatures, they're almost certainly gonna be able to cast the next turn with or the same turn, depending on when you cast Vapor Snag, with very little issue. So if you're Vapor Snagging a Death Shadow, that's that's a bit of a problem for you, unless you're going to be winning that turn. Now, Suspend gets rid of Death Shadow, for example, or any smaller creature, or any creature, actually, for 2 turns. And 2 turns is a long time. Now, if Vapor Snag wasn't going to win you in that scenario, then Suspend isn't going to do any better. But what Suspend does better than Vapor Snag is that creature's not going to come back for several turns. So for several turns, you have a clear path through, ideally taking care of their other creatures if there are any. So it clears a pathway. I'm not sure if it's a card I necessarily want to be playing in the main. I did in this deck because I mostly played in this list because I really wanted to see how well it worked. I enjoyed it. I felt like I enjoyed the ability to get rid of a creature for a while I did my other stuff. It also works well with Dreadhorde Arcanist because Dreadhorde Arcanist is going to attack in, recast Suspend on another creature, so you could essentially take out 2 creatures in the turn with Suspend, and that's a pretty powerful move, especially if you have lethal on the battlefield. So I like it. I think it's going to take more testing. Curious to hear from you what you think about Suspend and what its place is going to be in Modern, or maybe just in Temur Delver. Yeah, let me know. But I did enjoy it in this list. That's why I made the final cut. Permission. All right, so Mana Leak, no matter what you say, is going to be the best. I don't think we can replace it. It's just a card that we're going to keep, and Counterspell be damned. No, I'm just kidding. No, obviously Mana Leak is gone. Counterspell is here to stay. In almost every instance, Counterspell is better. The 2 blue, is a big thing for us. It does mean that we're going to be a bit more painful with our land. I mean, what I'm trying to say is you're going to be losing a lot more life than you're used to when you're fetching, because you need to guarantee 2 blue early on if you have Counterspell in your hand. If you don't have Counterspell in your hand yet, you don't necessarily have to fetch like you are going to have Counterspell. That's just my opinion. You're only running 4. I mean, you can't run more than 4. You're running 4 in this list. It's really going to be playing the odds game. If you need other colors, more importantly, early on, don't cut yourself off just because you want to maintain you early on. Of course, if you do have Counterspell in your opening hand or in the first few draws, make sure you're able to cast it. The only time I miss Mana Leak is the 1 colorless, honestly. Being able to use my mana a bit more efficiently was really nice with Mana Leak, because I could mix and match here, and I need to maintain blue, so it is what it is. But overall, Counterspell, huge I mean, I think it's a relatively huge upgrade to the archetype and to most control decks in general, or all control decks. So I think we're going to be seeing little to no Mana Leak play going forward, not only in Delver list but in any list. Counterspell is here to stay. That's just my opinion, but I think everyone kind of shares it. So Counterspell, really good. I've been really enjoying playing with it. It's awesome. Force of Negation staying a 4 of. I am playing Disrupting Shoal as a 4 of in this list. I know it's a shocker. You could have replaced it with literally anything else. I wanted to go heavy on pitch. A lot of creature decks coming up right now, and Force of Negation misses those cards. Disrupting Shoal doesn't. You have a relatively fair spread of 1 and 2 and even 3 CMC blue spells in your deck, counting Force of Negation. So I'm running with 4 Disrupting Shoals. I enjoyed them, and of course Force of Negation and Disrupting Shoal being a 4 of in your deck means sideboarding is going to be slightly easier. And what I mean by that is that these cards are usually the 2 flex spots depending on what you're playing. So I mean, if you're noticing that you're playing against a spell-based combo deck that has higher cost spells, Disrupting Shoal is going to be almost useless to you. Get rid of it, bring in something else from the sideboard that's going to be better if you do have something. Same thing for Force of Negation. If you're playing against a mostly creature deck like Merfolk, maybe get rid of Force of Negation, keep Disrupting Shoal, and so you can mix and match there. That's what I like about these 2 being 4-ofs in the deck. I really enjoyed playing with them, and I think Disrupting Shoal will become a bit more relevant as especially Merfolk becomes a bit more out of hand. You'll be able to hit their creatures. Of course, you have to work around Cavern of Souls, but that's a different discussion altogether. So yeah, I really like these 2 working together. I enjoyed it in the deck. If you're playing this particular list, I think Disrupting Shoal makes sense. Obviously, if you're playing DRC, there's really no room for Disrupting Shoal, but we'll get to that in the next deck tech. All right, the lands don't really change here. The only difference I've made is swap from 1 island to 1 breeding pool. So usually since the beginning of time, I've been playing 1 breeding pool, 1 stomping ground, 2 steam vents in my Delver lists. Now I'm playing 2. You could thank Counterspell for that. I'm playing 1 island, 2 breeding pool. The other main reason is I still want to be able to have access to green early on, and I just needed more sources of green and less sources of blue. But I don't want to cut myself out from blue completely because I need blue for everything, for at least for Counterspell. So breeding pool just made more sense. It gives me 2 of the main colors that I'm short on, and that's that. It's been working relatively well. I do miss having 3 basics to go get, but yeah, it is what it is. So this is the mana base that I'm going with going forward. The sideboard, right now with the meta the way it is, it's really gonna be, a shit show. Sorry for swearing. In terms of sideboard, I don't have a conclusion on what my sideboard is going to be like for the current meta. I'm really playing around with it. I'm seeing a lot of decks popping up. I'm seeing a lot of dredge decks coming up to the top. There's new Hell's Kitchen deck, which actually looks pretty cool, but also going to be a bit of a pain to deal with, so you need to bring in more graveyard hate for that. Merfolk is making a resurgence, and the new Merfolk decks are just really, really good. They're getting there, so you're going to have to keep in mind Merfolk. So this sideboard is very much in flux. The sideboard you're going to see next week for another Delver deck is going to be a bit different. It's just how it is. This is the sideboard that I finished off with when I stopped testing with this deck, just, last week. So 3 Veil of Summer, that hasn't changed. Alpine Moon is in place of Blood Moon, only because I can't justify playing Blood Moon in a deck that requires blue-blue, or even if it had green-green, I can't justify Blood Moon. We play pretty tight on lands, so, and you know, when we are playing Blood Moon, we want to play early. So Alpine Moon is what I've replaced it with. Alpine Moon is cheaper, which is nice. I mean, playing 1 mana, so you could play it even on turn 1, but you're only targeting 1 land or 1 type of land, which I think is fine. You're no longer going to be, you know, you're no longer going to have those games where you bring in Blood Moon against Jund and then just lock him out. I'll miss those days. But for now, I'll be fine with Alpine Moon shutting down primetime decks or any other deck that has problematic lands. Alpine Moon can come in if you want to kill Field. I was about to say Field of the Dead, but no, that's not the Field of Ruin is the card I'm thinking about, not Field of the Dead. Field of Ruin, you could also shut down with Alpine Moon. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily bring it in for that, but if it's been a problem for you, bring it in. This is what I'm currently playing with. Engineered Explosives, I'm still a 2 of. It's still a nice sweeper. Pretty good against Merfolk as well, by the way. Keep that in mind. Return to Nature as my artifact enchantment removal, and as well as some graveyard hate. But this number is fluctuating a bit now, to including some Grafdigger's Cages again. Cloth has got a Destiny as a 2 of. Really nice to grind out games, gain you some extra life. Even in aggro matches. Helps you gain up some extra life and survive a few more turns and hopefully take out your opponent. Huntmaster of the Fells, I'm still trying to make him work again. I really miss Huntmaster of the Fells. I really miss the days where Huntmaster of the Fells was just a brutal card. I still think it is. When it does hit the battlefield, I'm still winning within a couple of turns. That's just how it works with Huntmaster. Especially in a deck like this now where we can hit, you know, our 3rd and 4th and 5th even land drops a bit more consistently thanks to Abundant Harvest. Huntmaster of the Fells can work a bit better. I'm still not sure if it makes sense taking up 2 slots in the sideboard. Again, this is going to be fluctuating a lot, but this is where I ended off with. Alright, the matchups. Okay, so spell-based combo. You have a lot of firepower in the main against spell-based combo. I'm not too concerned. Once you start sniffing out Storm or Niftalite or whatever combo deck you might be sniffing out, you know, just keep your mana open, wait for it. Hopefully you have a couple of backup spells as well, and you're good to go. So I'm really not worried about spell-based combo. If you're playing against primetime decks, again, your counterspells will work, but you'll definitely have to lean on Alpine Moon to shut down, for example, Cavern of Souls or Valakut if they're playing that variant of primetime decks, which they almost always are. You're gonna have to play your Alpine Moons, you know, selectively. But I still think combo decks in general you can deal with quite well with the tools that you have in the 75. Aggro decks. Okay, so aggro decks is really, I'm not sure where we're gonna sit on aggro decks right now with this list. I did play plenty of aggro. You have decent removal between Lightning Bolt, Suspend, and Fire Ice, or Fire in this case, although Ice also works. So you do have quite a few tools to deal with them. You just have to be able to draw into them. Disrupting Shoal also does help here with the aggro matchups because, again, you can counter creatures, which is always nice. You can save your removal spells for your opponent's face or other creatures that made it through before. So, I mean, I'm based on what I've played so far with this deck and a few other Temur Delver decks, I'm putting aggro at about 50% as a baseline, which I think is fine for us. And if you feel like you need more firepower, you can play around with the numbers in the main, or you can play around with some extra firepower on the side. Engineered Explosives is still a thing, by the way, so you could bring that in as well and, you know, wreak havoc on your aggro players. I don't think we're poorly positioned against aggro decks. Big mana decks, Alpine Moon will come in handy to turn off specific Tron lands, which is always nice, and it's cheap, so it can come down early. You don't have to wait to have your perfect mana. You have, again, Force of Negation. Disrupting Shoal will be slightly less useful, so maybe that's a card you can side out a bit of in games 2 and game 3 to make room for other spells. But Force of Negation, counterspell, no longer having to worry about mana leak now, so you have a hard counterspell to stop whatever they're doing. I think your big mana matchups have improved. Yeah, I know that's a big thing to say because for a while I've always said big mana was a hard matchup. I think it's improved. I don't think we're necessarily super favored, but we do relatively well, and we have just that counterspell upgrade alone makes a huge difference. So yeah, I'm actually feeling a bit more happy about big mana spells, big mana decks. All right, not Magic. Well, I hate to say it, but there is a bit of a resurgence right now in Dredge. and Dredge-like decks. It's interesting. I still hate them very much. Still, if they have the nuts, they can win on turn 2. I still think it's a very BS way to play Magic. You're not really playing Magic, honestly. And let's all face it, even WotC doesn't want to admit that they also think that Dredge was a mistake. Whatever, it's here. Let's see where it actually pans out. Every once in a while when there's a shakeup in the format, Dredge decks kind of like pop their heads out of the ground, just to win some extra games because no one knows what the meta is like, and then they all go back underground and stop annoying us. So let's see what happens with Dredge. If it becomes really problematic, you're going to have to pack in a lot more graveyard hate, and that's really it. Your Force of Negations actually do help here early on, stopping Cathartic Reunions or whatever. And you just have to make sure you hit their graveyard as hard as possible. Surgical Extraction is a good choice as well. Grafdigger's Cage also a nice choice, and you could use Return to Nature as your artifact enchantment removal that also has graveyard hate built in. So just up your graveyard hate and try to make sure your graveyard hate can cover as many decks as possible, which is usually easy. Stoneblade decks. So I had a lot of trouble with Stoneblade decks. I'm still trying to figure them out. They seem to be accelerating, and now there's a lot of Orzhov Stoneblade decks coming out with Ephemerate and Grief, and it's just brutal. It really is brutal because, turn 1 they'll Grief you, potentially with Ephemerate, strip you of a lot of cards, turn 2 Stoneforge, go get whatever, and if they've already stripped you of removal and you don't draw into it, you're going to be dealing with a Batterskull turn 3, and that's really a big problem. So still trying to figure that out. That being said, I have won games where I've been turn 1 Grief Ephemerated, which means I lost 3 cards, and I believe that matchup is going to be going up today. Stay tuned for that. So it is possible to win. I mean, discarding it only has a limitation on its uses, but I'm still trying to adjust to the way Stoneblade decks have evolved. Do I think this is a poor matchup? I think it starts at 50-50. It might get worse it might get worse in games 2 and game 3, depending on what kind of graveyard hate they bring in against you. They do have access to white. Rest in Peace is a thing, and Rest in Peace will hit you very hard. So yeah, let's just see how the format shapes up. Generally speaking, I don't mind playing Stoneblade decks because, again, you do have artifact removal on the side. But I'm just saying right now with Grief and Ephemerate, I'm going to see how much longer these decks play this little cute interaction. And if it drops, then great. If it not, we'll have to readjust our strategy. Last but not least, mid-range. I don't think much changes in our mid-range plan. I'm not sure if I should consider Hell's Kitchen mid-range. I feel like it's a bit more aggro, but let's just say it's mid-range. If that's the case, we're going to have to see how we're going to deal with Hell's Kitchen. It's an interesting new archetype. Well, it's not an archetype yet. It hasn't posted real results. It's an interesting new deck. I like to see what it does and how long it does it, and we may adjust our strategy accordingly. But again, that's mostly going to be in the sideboard, not in the main. I think for a Dreadhorde list, you're perfectly fine. You're able to recast spells from your sideboard, from your graveyard, like removal spells, whatever it may be, to kind of keep them at bay. But yeah, we'll see how things pan out with that list. And that's it for Temur Dread Delver update, June 2021, I should say. This was a fun deck to revisit, even though I only deck teched it recently. But with some upgrades from Strixhaven and now from Modern Horizons 2, I think it was a fair deck to start off with without making too many drastic changes to the deck. Next week, I'll be covering a Delver deck that has far more drastic changes. It's going to be very interesting. But for this week, this is a good start. Just getting out my ideas on how the meta is currently shaping up. Again, it's still kind of the Wild West out there. We're still seeing what's going to stick, what's not. But let me know in the comment section down below what you think about the specific upgrades to this list. I'd love to hear your opinions on the new cards coming out, how you would play this Dreadhorde list if it was up to you. That's why we're sharing ideas here. I'd love to hear from it. So if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, share my content on social media, watch my content start to finish like you are right now. All this stuff really helps me out a lot. And like I said at the beginning of this video, Patreon, check out the link in the description of this video. Check out the short video that's on my Patreon page. It'll tell you all you need to know about how my Patreon is set up to make you money, not me. I mean that seriously. The Patreon is really mostly there to A, produce content for the channel, and B, give back everything that content produces back to the patrons. So check that out. Thanks, and have a good one.